Shit happens, accept it. One of life's greatest lessons is how we can turn our shit into manure. Here's a hint. It requires getting your hands dirty. There are many metaphors for our existence on this planet. Depending on your perspective, life's a stage, a bowl of cherries or a box of chocolates. One of my favorite images is that of a garden. Going through life, it's up to us to treat the soil and select the seeds we plant. We must make sure that there's plenty of sunlight, shade, and water. With patience, persistence, and some pruning and some weeding, we eventually reap what we have sown. Some of the fruits of our labor will be bitter, others will be sweet. You get the idea. Gardening is the practice of growing and cultivating plants as part of horticulture. In gardens, ornamental plants are often grown in their flowers, foliage, or overall appearance. Useful plants such as root vegetables, leaf vegetables, fruits, and herbs are grown for consumption, for use as dyes, or for medicinal or cosmetic use. Gardening ranges in scale from fruit orchards to long boulevard plantings with one or more different types of shrubs, trees, and herbaceous plants, to residential back gardens including lawns and foundation plantings, all the way to container gardens grown inside or outside. Gardening may be very specialized with only one type of plant grown or involve a variety of plants in mixed plantings. It involves an active participation in the growing of plants and tends to be labor intensive, which differentiates it from farming or forestry. In ancient times, forest gardening, a forest-based food production system, is the world's oldest form of gardening. Forest gardens originated in prehistoric times along jungle-clad river banks and in the wet foothills of monsoon regions in the gradual process of families improving their immediate environment. Useful tree and vine species were identified, protected, and improved, while undesirable species were eliminated. Eventually, foreign species were also selected and incorporated into the gardens. After the emergence of the first civilizations, wealthy individuals began to create gardens for aesthetic purposes. Ancient Egyptian tomb paintings from the New Kingdom, around 1500 BC, provide some of the earliest physical evidence of ornamental horticulture and landscape design. They depict lotus ponds surrounded by symmetrical rows of acacias and palms. A notable example of ancient ornamental gardens were the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, while ancient Rome had dozens of gardens. Wealthy ancient Egyptians used gardens for providing shade. Egyptians associated trees and gardens with gods, believing that their deities were pleased by gardens. Gardens in ancient Egypt were often surrounded by walls with trees planted in rows. Among the most popular species planted were date palms, sycamores, fig trees, nut trees, and willows. These gardens were a sign of the higher social economic status. In addition, wealthy ancient Egyptians grew vineyards. As wine was a sign of the higher social classes, roses, poppies, daisies, and irises could all also be found in the gardens of the Egyptians. Assyria was renowned for its beautiful gardens. These tended to be wide and large, some of them used for hunting game, rather like a game reserve today, and others as leisure gardens. Cypresses and palms were some of the most frequently planted types of trees. Gardens were also available in Kush, in Mazarat, as Sufra. The great enclosure dated to the 3rd century BC included splendid gardens. Ancient Roman gardens were laid out with hedges and vines and contained a wide variety of flowers: acanthus, cornflowers, crocus, cyclamen, hyacinth, iris, ivy, lavender, lilies, myrtle, narcissus, poppy, rosemary, and violets, as well as statues and sculptures. Flower beds were popular in the country yards of rich Romans. The Middle Ages represent a period of decline in gardens for aesthetic purposes. After the fall of Rome, gardening was done for the purpose of growing medicinal herbs and or decorating church altars. Monasteries carried on a tradition of garden design and intense horticultural techniques during the medieval period in Europe. Generally, monastic garden types consisted of kitchen gardens, infirmary gardens, cemetery orchards, cloister gardens, and vineyards. Individual monasteries might also have had a green court, a plot of grass and trees where horses could graze, as well as a cellular's garden or private gardens for obedientaries, monks who had specific posts within the monastery. Islamic gardens were built after the model of Persian gardens, and they were usually enclosed by walls and divided in four by water courses. Commonly, the center of the garden would have a reflecting pool or pavilion. Specific to the Islamic gardens are the mosaics and glazed tiles used to decorate the rills and fountains that were built in these gardens. By the late 13th century, rich Europeans began to grow gardens for leisure and for medicinal herbs and vegetables. They surrounded the gardens by walls to protect them from animals and to provide seclusion. During the next 2 centuries, Europeans started planting lawns and raising flower beds and trellises of roses. Fruit trees were common in the garden, and also in some there were turf seats. At the same time, the gardens in the monasteries were a place to grow flowers and medicinal herbs, but they were also a space where the monks could enjoy nature and relax. The gardens in the 16th and 17th century were symmetric, proportioned, and balanced with a more classical appearance. Most of these gardens were built around a central axis, and they were divided into different parts by hedges. Commonly, gardens had flower beds laid out in squares and separated by gravel paths. Gardens in Renaissance were adorned with sculptures, topiary, and fountains. In the 17th century, knot gardens became popular along with the hedge mazes. By this time, Europeans started planting new flowers such as tulips, marigolds, and sunflowers. Cottage gardens, which emerged in Elizabethan times, appear to have originated as a local source for herbs and fruits. One theory is that they arose out of the Black Death of the 1340s, when the death of so many laborers made land available for small cottages with personal gardens. According to the late 19th century legend of origin, these gardens were originally created by the workers that lived in the cottages of the villages to provide them with food and herbs, with flowers planted among them for decoration. Farm workers were provided with cottages that had architectural quality set in a small garden, about 1 acre, 0.40 hectares, where they could grow food and keep pigs and chickens. Thank you all for watching till the end. Stay tuned for the next one.